Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. Today I am joined by Marc, a longtime mind-body sufferer since the 5th grade, who's here to tell us how he got better from listening to the podcast and creating his system within my system. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we'll get back to you personally. And finally, you can reserve your place in one of my seminars or purchase any of my mind-body guides, also known as the PDFs, at www.crushingdoubt.org. Marc, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you on. You and I initially connected in the comments on YouTube, and what you told me I thought was really important for people to hear because you got better just from the podcast alone, if I understand correctly. I'm sure you've done other mind-body work at various points, but maybe not. I don't know. So tell me what it's been like.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you for having me on. I told you in my email it was an honor to be on your show, mostly because for me, it's a power column work. It definitely is something I want to do. I think it's crazy how many sufferers there are out there that when they get better, they want to help somebody. And this feels like in some small way that I can do that. And then secondly, I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing. We can get into that later, why this podcast, I think, is a lot different than other. But what you're doing is pretty incredible, and I really, really thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marc. That means a lot to me. So tell me, we talked a little bit before, and you told me that you really have, actually looking back on it, have been a mind-body sufferer at least since 5th grade, if not before then.
Yeah, so, and this is something obviously that in retrospect it comes out. You don't know it at the time, but 5th grade, I broke my leg skateboarding, very common, or at least somewhat common. Mm-hmm. What was uncommon about that was I spent 3 days in the hospital, just in agony. I mean, screaming pain. I'm sure people were horrified. But that makes sense in the context. I had just lost my dad that year. He had died, of which it was very traumatic because I pretty much woke up and saw him. He had died from a massive stroke, and there he is lying there. So obviously a very traumatic event as a 5th grader. And then 2 years previously, my mom had been shot in a robbery. And I had watched almost the exact same thing happen. So a lot of early trauma, but what's very unique, and it's something that, I'm not sure it is, I'm sure looking at it as a community, but even that you have such resilience as a child that, those things happened to me, and then I kind of moved on. And other than that very direct pain, sure, I had a few other little things, but they weren't very significant. And I was able to deal with those just fine. And I mean, if you had asked me, I was, and this is a little bit to accepting your trauma. I was like, well, I had a great upbringing, and I would almost kind of dismiss that with a little laugh, these bad things happened to me, but they were no big deal, which resonates a little with what you have said before. So, I went on to, I'm a high achiever. I did really good in school, went to a great school for college, went on to start doing my career, and and have been very successful in pretty much everything I've done. So kind of fast forward that, then, now I got 3 kids, I got a demanding job, and this is 20 years ago. And I start getting some, back pain. Again, a lot different than yourself and most of the people I've seen on your podcast. I was never debilitating pain. But one thing I always did, I never stopped working out. And I like to think that was the thing that kept it from getting bad. I mean, and there were a couple times where I was like, this might kill me, literally, when I had some weird pains and I didn't know what it was. But I was like, I can't live in fear. So I had that always kind of in my the back of my mind. And again, I think that was very helpful. And it goes to many of the things that you talk about.
Mm-hmm. Which I should say, Mark, that's something that we can talk about here, that each one of you out there that's suffering, you bring strengths to the table that you may have already been doing certain things. Sometimes in what I talk about, I'm articulating what it was that you're doing so that you can recognize it and then continue to do it or to enhance it.
Absolutely. And from the videos, I have definitely gotten that. So I ended up reading Sarno's first book, like Mind Over Back Pain. I can't remember which one.
Mind Over Back Pain was his first.
It was the thin one.
Yep.
Read that. I actually passed off to some of my friends who are, I very much value their opinion. They were like, yeah, there's some good stuff there. But I didn't really. I was just like, this is interesting. I just like reading. I'm a lifetime learner. And so I found it interesting, but I wasn't really applying it. Later on, had more pains, and then read his last book, The Divided Mind. And I found that to be very interesting. But till I got into this, I was like, well, maybe this is a stretch. He starts talking about a lot of different maladies covered under this umbrella.
Yep.
And again, kind of moved on from there, using physical therapist and my own, strengths, like I said, to kind of move on. And that was good. About 3 years ago, I was approaching the age that my dad died. My mom, who was doing great, but she had just entered assisted living, and I was working a lot of issues with that. And then I started noticing this pain was just constant. Again, never missed a day of work, but it's like I'd have tennis elbow, I'd have golfer's elbow, I'd have plantar fasciitis, neck pain, back pain. And I went to, in kind of the final straw, I went to a physical therapist who I love. She's a great person. But had no mind-body training. And I come in there and I'm like, well, it's strangely enough, I've like my elbow pain moved from my right to my left arm. I said, we've been treating this for like 4 weeks and now I've got this. And it was kind of like maybe you're starting to favor that arm too much. And that, I was just like, in the back of my mind, I was kind of like, hold up, I remember reading something about this. And so I went right back to the Sarno book on my bookshelf. It was like, okay, let's see about tendonitis. And he mentions it just very briefly. It's not discussed, but he's obviously discussing a lot of topics in that book. But he had a part, the tendonitis, and I was like, okay, I got to go down this route. And then I started doing a lot more education in the mind-body stuff. I saw your interview on curable, and that's kind of what brought me to you. In fact, you probably don't remember this, but I emailed you. In fact, I bought the PDFs, but the PDFs are kind of tough. They're great, and I was going to sign up for some one-on-one work with you, but I was like, well, you're giving these podcasts, and being the kind of person that I am, where it's like, I believe in ultimate preparation for everything. I was like, well, I can't really go to a meeting unless I've watched his podcast. And then I started recovering just from the podcast alone. So that was a long story, and I apologize, but that's how I got here.
Well, the story though is very valuable because the people suffering out there, they need to hear this. They need to hear how long you've grappled with certain things and what the journey was like. As an example, it's important that people hear that when you first read Sarno, and this was similar to me, when I first got the Sarno book, I didn't read it for a year. And then even after I read Mind Over Back Pain, which was also the first one I read, I thought it made some sense, but I didn't buy into it as fully as I did. As The Divided Mind is the one that made it click for me more. And so what year was it that you read The Divided Mind?
That was probably at least 10 years ago.
Okay, so you had gotten into this, but then...
But that was still very initially, like I was reading it just... because I was in back pain, but I really, again, and we can talk more about why your podcasts are so powerful or your system is, but I still didn't understand the system by reading Sarno. I started believing it.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where somebody would offer to do an MRI. I'm like, nah, I don't think that's even worthwhile.
Right. Well, I think Sarno is so wonderful in so many ways, completely saved my life. But in some ways, there were two people who saved my life. One was Sarno, and the other was me. And the reason I say that is that I had to ask my questions. I had to say, well, okay, Sarno, it was like what you said. I believed in mind body. I believed that I even had it. But to get better from it, I felt like there wasn't a system. And that's what I've tried to develop. So tell me a little bit about what you did find in the podcast then.
I mean, two things. One, your personality, very empathetic type person. And the fact that you're even doing this versus that, and we can talk more about why I think that your small groups is really important as well. I didn't happen to use it, but I think it would be a hugely beneficial tool. But in the end, the fact that you're willing to put all this information out there, not like, okay, here's a teaser, but, come, sign up for this $1,000 course and you can do, I mean, that is a big thing to me because unfortunately, I believe money drives bad things in the medical side of this.
Yeah.
And then by far the most important thing, fundamentally, you have a system that really accounts for everything. It's flexible enough to account for everybody's problems in the various things. And that might not initially seem that way to somebody, but when you really take the time to soak it in, it absolutely does. And while it's flexible, it has a kind of a defined structure. And that structure is so important for somebody out there suffering. They're kind of like, I read the books and now, I've been told to meditate. Well, what do I do with that?
Right.
Right. That's just like my next hurdle that I have to, overcome is, what am I going to do there? So, and the belief that you have in your system transfers to your patients. I'm 100% positive of that. And that's a huge aspect of it, where if a doctor, which I did see a great doctor who's a mind body doctor, but also like an MD,
mm-hmm.
He didn't have as much of a system in place. And that's where I only got partial. So I was already partially, quote unquote, healed when I came, but I couldn't move past this, this point. And the only thing that has worked so far is watching these podcasts. And then really, I gave it a lot of soak time. I mean, I have thought about this a lot because you have to put it together for yourself. You can't just hear something. And that should be obvious, but.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the kind words. It's incredibly meaningful to me, and it's exciting to know that I'm helping people actually get better, and that you got so much out of it. But I do think you're right about a lot of things, including the system of it all. See, one of the things that I think we run into in the mind-body field that's tough is that there's no one who's trained in the whole thing. Like I'm not trained in the medical side, and the medical people aren't trained in the psychological side. And you needed Sarno and Arlene Feinblatt to come together to even be able to get some system down. And they did have a system, and it worked for thousands of people, and they changed lives. I kind of want to continue in that vein, but one nice thing about the way that I do it, I think, is that it's just much more specified and laid out. And I know it does take time to soak up, and you said it very well, and I'm glad you said it, because what you're saying is the information is all there, but it's going to take time for you to incorporate it in the right way.
Absolutely. And I always think about riding a bike. I mean, that's all your subconscious working that.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't happen the first time you get on a bike. I mean, no. And you're going to even take some falls. Most people did. so, and so that process is important to kind of go through.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've discussed this many times, everybody. It's not linear. It's not necessary. You could get to a point where you're like, okay, I understand the system. I don't have doubt. But then, in fact, I want to bring it up. I know we're trying to keep to a certain time, but I've got a few.
Talk freely.
One was
This
an
is good.
example that happened just about a month ago. It was literally just the time when, probably right before we had communicated about coming on the show. I do a lot of athletic things. I was water skiing. I'm kind of into that sport, and on kind of a competitive level. And so I was water skiing, and all of a sudden I took a random fall. Just like 1 second I'm there, next thing I'm flying through the air at 35 miles an hour. I land. I was like, ow. Instant back pain, instant shoulder pain. But I was like, okay, I'm okay. My wife comes, drives the boat back, and she's like, oh my gosh. I was like, well, I want to go right back and start skiing again, because I felt like this was a power column thing. I was like, God, I that scared me, and I can't allow it to scare me. But I looked, my water ski was messed up. I mean, it was a really bad fall. I said, okay, this is going to be very interesting to see where this kind of breaks out, because I have come to believe, like you, there is a huge mind-body component on everything that we do. And this was a legitimate accident, but I also was, I'm able to move. I mean, I'm not sure there's anything structurally wrong. Next few days, yeah, shoulder hurt, back hurts, very minor. I'm like, well, I guess I'm cured. And so I'm doing some work, and I'm kind of bent over, and all of a sudden my back hurts, real pain. And I was like, oh no, okay, maybe I did injure myself. But that, now, of course, logic and science would say, why would your back not hurt for 4 days? But now it kind of kicks in. So I go back, I'm like, well, I'm going to have to do some of this mind body stuff. And, but I just kind of blew it off for a little bit. And then I'm at home sitting there with my achy back. I'm like, while I was doing this thing, I got a phone call from the assisted living facility where my mom was at, saying she was going to the hospital. And now, I'm a very calm person. I was like, okay, we've been here before. This isn't a big deal. And I did not even consider that was an issue.
Yep.
But then when I'm sitting on my couch, I was like, this is the most obvious. How did I not see this? And it goes to why I just love the name of your podcast, Crushing Doubt, because doubt will always try to creep back in, like you had said. And it will surprise you, because you're like, no, that's not. 3 hours later, my pain was, I woke up the next morning. I was like, hey, I'm good to go.
That's amazing. And
yeah,
you're right. That captures,
it is amazing.
It captures the subtlety that doubt uses. It's so easy for it to creep back in.
Yeah. And that was a legitimate thing that it could kind of say, hey, sure, Mark, you had this accident. And so but again, kind of what you've talked about in your podcast is this system. And you go back to the system when you've got the time, and it works. Okay, let me go through oh, yeah, that's one of my big ticket emotional items. Of course, it's going to have some impact.
Now, one other thing I wanted to ask you about it. You mentioned the power column was particularly useful to you as well. And I do think doubt and power, those are the two big areas that I am very different than most of the people out there, well, really everybody out there. So can you talk a little bit about what the power column work was like for you?
Yeah. So, and again, I hope I'm remembering right from your podcast, but when you talk about the third level of doubt, it's the doubt in yourself. Yes. That's very much also a power column.
Yeah, right. That's the beginning of the power column right there.
Yeah. So I mean, you could put it in one or the other, but But for me, that was the biggest thing when I started realizing I can do this. And I've been reading a lot of the books that you have described, like You Are the Placebo. That's a great, and in fact, I've been concentrating a lot of books right now just on belief, just trying to understand belief better.
Yeah.
Because I think that aspect of the power column is the most critical thing, for especially if you're 80% better, but you still got 20%. Um, you talked about something the other day. You said, I'm a slow motion Wolverine or something to that effect, how you get better.
Yeah.
But I don't want to overstate this, but you start feeling a little superhero-ish. You're like, oh my God, I have so much that I believe I think I can do with my mind. And when you start feeling that, and that's not all the time at all.
Right.
But when that's I feel like you're in that power column hard, and you're like, wow, that's a heady kind of feeling when you start making those things. And I don't think it has to be, like some life altering thing. I mean, I believe that's life altering, understanding that power. But I don't think it's not like you're having to make radical changes. I have to quit my job and become a mind body therapist.
Right.
But you have to believe in yourself. And when you do, and you start realizing the potential, and I think that's also a little scary too. I mean, there's some amount of fear being like, wow, there's all these things I can do. And, now I need to do it.
Right. Absolutely. You capture that very well, because it is really, it's where the power column came from. Is I got better by crushing doubt, and then suddenly I was like, oh my God, I've never felt this powerful. I've never felt I could do all these different things, and it made me consider maybe I can do other things. Even the idea of writing the book or launching this podcast, it all came from the fact that I gained the confidence through getting through the symptoms. If I hadn't had the symptoms, this would not be happening.
Yeah. And I think there's, to some degree, especially, Sarno talks about a leap of understanding. This is the only one place where it's a leap of faith in my mind, where I have to say, there's no reason you can't do this. Take the leap of faith that what's different about me than anybody else that's cured themselves. I use that, but you have to believe in yourself for at least a moment to start getting the ball rolling. And then when you see that builds on itself. So I've always thought that's the leap of faith. Sarno didn't really discuss that much, but it is huge.
Yep. And in the You Are the Placebo and some books like that, you get a sense that there is some leap of faith. But I wanted to say one thing before we wrap up here.
Yep.
You just said something really key, which is you have to believe in yourself for a moment. It's not that you start to believe in yourself all the time. We go up and down. We're moment to moment beings.
Yep.
But you're right. When you can break through and believe in yourself for a moment, then you can make more gains. And every gain you make gives more confidence. And over time,
and then
you get there.
That comes right back into the power column.
That's right.
I know you're trying to wrap this up, and I don't mean to keep digressing. The one thing, though, that I wanted to say for your small group work, because maybe getting your problems resolved just watching your podcast is a admirable goal. I think that's going to work for maybe some people. I think I was very lucky. I think one thing that's huge in this mind-body medicine world is the sense of community that you get with a small group that I don't have. I mean, I could still see signing up for your small group at some point, for the fact that at some point I might need that. I think a real detriment to getting better is just constantly hearing well-intentioned people I love say, oh, that's great. I really believe in that. But my pain's real, or that's great for you.
Right.
And not only does it hurt to see so many people with this problem, and I think it's so universal, but B, then to kind of be put on the island of like, well, it works for you, which is in some way saying, that's probably not the right solution, but at least it works for you type of thing. And I think a sense of community that you can get with the small might be almost more important than some of the other stuff, because now finally you're in a group of people that believe in this, and obviously with you leading it, who you get to borrow some of your belief as well.
Such important points. And Marc, I love what you said. I'm so honored that you took the time to share these thoughts, and I'm just happy that you're doing so well. And I think what you said is going to help a lot of people, because there's so many different ways to get better from this within the system that gets laid out. We give you the information, and then people find their way in different ways. Some people take to it right away from the podcast. Some people need that community, or they may need some extra explaining, or they may need a specific time with me to ask specific questions. But thank you for taking the time to share your story. And I'm happy that I was a help to you and that you're doing well. And I'm
very
honored.
Much so. So
go ahead.
Thank you for all your help. And I believe in continuing education. So I watch your podcast every time they come out. I'm pretty much, maybe I wait and store up 2 or 3 and then listen to them while doing something. But I will continue to watch, because I think it's very fascinating. Plus, I use it somewhat to counter all this negative stuff that you hear that we're exposed to constantly. Oh, go to your doctor for this. Go to,
It's actually
not trying to deny.
No, I think that's one last thing. It's funny. You and I, we can't get off here because we're so excited to talk to each other about this.
Yeah.
But I think that the amount of messaging we get from society, it's one of the reasons why I want to say things as forcefully and clearly as I can, is I had to shut out everybody when I was trying to get better, because there were too many voices. I didn't know who to trust. It was really hard. And so I try to earn people's trust with that clarity, with that system, and with my availability. And I'm just honored that you came on here to talk about this, and let's keep in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Dan.
All right, Marc. Well, I think you guys can see that Marc and I would have liked to talk about this for much longer. He's very excited about what he discovered in the work, and I'm very excited to see someone discovering so much in my work. And of course, I do hear from lots of you guys about getting better. But one thing that was pretty unique about Marc is that he got better just from the podcast. And in a way, that was very validating for me to hear, because the podcast isn't always super well organized for everybody to use as its own full system. But what he showed is that if you're committed to just working on it and understanding what each concept is, eventually you get there. He said it, that, you go over it, you keep going over it, and it starts to coalesce. In addition, he built his own system. And that's a very important part of the process. You're going to build a system within my system, whether you do it with the podcast or the mind-body guides, the PDFs, or whether you come to the seminars. There's many ways to build your system, but that's what you need to do. And it was very exciting to see that Marc was able to do it, and I know all of you can do it too. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and we'll get back to you personally.